way. But to that point, to kind of move on from Joel, so if they are going to double Joel in some capacity, I mean, we'll keep talking about the Nets, but really, let's be honest, we're talking about larger picture here. Harden's going to have to make him pay. Last night, Maxey was the one that did it. What did you think of James Harden last night? Because to me, it just seemed like such a classic frustrating Harden game. He looks disinterested. He's sloppy with the ball. He's not running hard. Early on, I thought he was their main problem when it came to effort and like a lack of flow on offense. But what were your takeaways from Harden's game?
My takeaway is that he sucked. He was terrible.
Yeah. And that's the pod. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys for listening and tuning in, and we'll talk in a day or two.
Sucks. Yeah.
No, look, he was really bad, and I think a lot of this stuff that I mentioned it in passing last podcast, but the inside the arc finishing is just really bad, and that's a concern. I do think there was a moment or two that I thought he looked good where he beat Claxton on a switch, got to the rim, and then he just missed. But like, we can only say, oh, he looked good beating him, but then missed at the rim so many times without being like, all right, man, but eventually you got to make a fucking layup.
Why do you think he's missing? Do you think it's just bad luck, just like, like a hitter in baseball going through a cold streak? Or do you think this is a larger sign of something that's wrong?
Well, I do think you can see the difference between when he goes up hard toward the rim and James putting up these like little push shots where he doesn't look like he's committed to getting there. And it's hard to say whether that's he can't do it or he won't do it. Like, is he trying to sell out for calls? Does he want to highlight? Is he shooting that shot because he knows he's getting hit on the forearm or something? Or is he doing it because he doesn't want to jump at Nick Claxton or Dorian Finney-Smith or Mikal Bridges or whoever it is, and he's just more comfortable taking a bullshit floater or runner or whatever it is? Like, I mean, I don't know that. He didn't talk after the game last night, so it's hard to know what's going through his mind, what his body is feeling like.
If it is that second one, do you think that's injury related, or do you think that's just where he's at in his game?
I would think it's more mental than physical. Like, you can't come out after game one and be like, body's feeling great, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden things go poorly. And it's like, oh, well, actually my Achilles has been bothering me for 4 months or whatever it is. And you can't have it both ways. Either you're feeling good or you're not. And I think a lot of the mistakes you saw him, like, set aside the shooting, the mistakes you saw him make were all mental stuff. Like, lost the ball in transition with nobody around him, a pass to nobody in the corner, like there's just nobody there, a bad turnover. That's the stuff where it's like he's a little bit in his own head. You hope that it's just a one game struggle. Maybe he was at Delilah's too long the night before, and he's just not locked in all the way.
Right.
And he's not taking the Nets that seriously. Like, you hope it's something like that. But this kind of performance is exactly why he's going to have to earn the trust of people, that he's going to be able to get it done long enough in the playoffs for them to win a title, right? Because, I mean, if we looked at raw box score stats for Harden in the playoffs, it's not like he's a bad playoff player, right? Like, we can say he's got good averages, he's had some big moments, so on and so forth. But he has these inexplicable, just mentally tuned out games.
Yeah.
And on top of that, on defense, he's just not very good, right? Like, the mental checkout component is pretty much, I won't say always there, but is very present in his game most of the time. So when he does have these offensive struggles and he's tuned out mentally on offense and, kind of going through the motions, he's not making up for it at the other end. And that's kind of the problem. If he was the sort of guy that would say, all right, I'm having a bad shooting night, or I've got bad turnovers, but then he's locking people down at the other end of the floor, it's like, okay, that's somebody that you can go to war with, and he's going to find ways to win, whatever. Like, it's what we're saying about Joel. He's not scoring, he's not doing this, but he's got 19 rebounds, he's playmaking, he's doing this. Like, the best thing they could say about Harden last night between Doc and Joel and all the other guys is, well, he really managed the game. And I was like, man, are we having Ben Simmons flashbacks here? Like, oh yeah, he got us into our stuff. And like, yeah, there's an element of that. Sure. He got them into their sets. They got the ball to Joel. That's an important part of why they took off in the second half. But if that's the best thing you can say about him in a playoff game, we're going down a dark road, man. And I hope that's not all we see from James.
Although I will say there was a moment where Maxey tried to do a pass to Joel and just couldn't get it to him. So it does make you appreciate those little things that Harden does well. What I can't decide about Harden, and I'm genuinely on the fence about this. This was not often where I find myself on issues, but I really can't decide if I'm worried about him or not. Because I was so strongly after game one, like he looks good. He played well, obviously had all those threes. He looked physically healthy. He got to the rim. Missed layups are what they are. But I think it kind of is probably what you just said, how he just has these games. And the frustrating part about it is the Sixers are just going to have to hope and pray this doesn't happen against Boston. Like point blank.
Flip a coin, man.
Yeah,
Flip
exactly. And that's the frustrating part, right? Like you just have to hope. And I think what makes it especially frustrating is it just seems mental. Like it doesn't seem physical. Like there's just sometimes there's people out there. I mean, look, I can speak to it. Like some days I go into the radio station, you're just not feeling up to it. And you're like, oh, I'm having a bad day, whatever. But it seems like Harden just comes into these games sometimes and is like, well, I'm a little out of it. And he has so much trouble rebounding and getting himself into it. So that is kind of where I would fall on Harden, where I don't see physical issues that make me concerned. And in some ways that's better, right? Because if he was dealing with an Achilles injury, that's a real problem. But then in some ways, the mental stuff is so helpless. It's almost more frustrating in that way because it's not something, like an Achilles injury where a trainer can work on it. It's just kind of, you got to hope going into this game, Harden's decided he's going to bring it. And against Boston, maybe he will. It'll be high impact games each time. I think last night did feel like the series was over already when the game tipped. So maybe that's it. But the Harden thing after last night, it does creep back, concern into your head.
So I'm going to circle back to something that he actually said prior to the series starting. He says, when you win in the playoffs, feels like you're never going to lose again. When you lose in the playoffs, it feels like the season is over.
Yeah.
And so if you apply that to individual performances, like game one, James hits a ton of step back threes, and it's like, man, James Harden is back. They're going on a finals run.
In the league. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Game two, he has a poor game, and we're all like, is he cooked? And oh my God, they're losing in round two. This is a disaster. Daryl Morey's going to pay him $200 million and cripple the franchise. And it's like, game at a time, everybody. They got 2 wins down, 14 more to go to win a title. That is ultimately what matters. Like we could do the same thing with everybody else, except for Joel and Tyrese. It's like, look, box score says what it is. Maybe the plus minus is bad. Maybe the shooting numbers are bad, whatever it is. The important thing is 2-0, finding ways to win, adjusting to the moment. I don't care if Joel scores 50 or 5. I don't care if James scores 30 or has 15 assists versus 1 assist. If they manufacture ways to win and they come together as a team. And look, we haven't even brought up Tobias Harris. Like, there's a great Tobias Harris game.
Yeah, and he was good in game one.
Great second half performance. Like, it's going to take, like, I wrote this in the recap last night. Tobias is going to be on the floor for like every single important possession this team has in fourth quarters, right? Yeah. Unlike PJ Tucker, who Doc benched last night, I thought it was an interesting decision late in the game. Tobias is just going to be on the floor. Like, I don't see any reality where Doc says, Tobias, you're out of the game. And so to see him step up on both ends of the floor, like making defensive plays, changing his role on offense where he's operating in the dunker spot, getting going in transition, honestly crashing the offensive glass, which I don't think he's a good rebounder at all. I think that's one of the reasons that they've been such a poor rebounding team. And so Tobias doing all those things to help manufacture a win, that's what it takes to win an NBA championship. It's not always like, look, ideally in our brains, we'd love to say, Joel Embiid scores 40 points a game. The best players are the best players, and that's why you win. But a lot of times you win because Joel shoots 7 for 20, has an okay game, and somebody steps up. Maybe that's Tyrese Maxey. Maybe that's Tobias. Maybe that's Paul Reed. Maybe it's Jalen McDaniels. You don't know what a game is going to require on a given night. So I try not to get too lost in James had a bad game, this guy had a good game, whatever it is, and you focus on they all season long have manufactured wins and they figure out ways to beat different coverages, different teams, different styles. and they just keep marching on. And right now, that's all that matters.
Well, and again, this is kind of, it ties back to how like a main takeaway from the game last night was I just believe in them more than I used to. And I think what you just said is probably why, because all season I've seen them win games where we come on afterwards and it's Harden wasn't that great, but you know what? Like, man, Melton really stepped up, or Embiid was only okay, but Paul Reed had the Paul Reed game. And so they were able to win that game. Right. So I think that's just such a major difference between this team now and what they used to be. And I think that winning those ways again and again and again has given them confidence that they can. Like in past years, when Joel has struggled and you don't have as much of a track record of seeing them win games anyway, I'm sure even on the bench and in the locker room, there's a feeling of, like Joel doesn't have it. This might not be going well for us. Whereas I do think this year there is a sense, and I really felt it in the stadium last night too. Like there was frustration from fans. It was probably a little quiet to start. But that second half, when they got going, it was unbelievable. Like I don't think fans really ever felt that they were going to lose that game. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The manufacturing win things is extremely impressive, and in some ways more important than overreacting to a bad Harden game. The last thing I wanted to talk about with this game, and then I guess we should actually probably get into the leading scorer, Tyrese Maxey. But we talked